but the heart. You remember? And I said, let's just enjoy the warmth and the sentiment of the Christmas hymns. Today, it's Christmas Eve, the day before. And I wanted for us to enjoy a little bit more of the spirit of the season by looking at the Christmas carols. But instead of just singing and enjoying the ambiance and the feeling of it, I would like us to actually pay attention to the words. There is some very big theology in the songs that we call Christmas carols. And when we're singing them, I think we have a sense of that, but I don't know if we actually focus on the meaning that's there. So that's what I would like to do today. Look at some of these very beautiful and heartwarming songs that we sing at this time of year every December, but I want us to take a look at the deep meaning that's embedded in them. Some of it may surprise you. So let's take a look at number 115 for starters. But I want to sort of survey some of the lyrics and take a look at what they mean. We're starting with number 115. I believe Lena was just playing this in the background. O come, Emmanuel. It has that Jewish feeling, right? In the minor key. And it's actually crying out for the Emmanuel to come and deliver Israel, it says in the first verse. But I want you to take a look at the second and third verses. Second verse says, O come, thou wisdom from on high, and order all things, far and nigh. To us the path of knowledge show, and cause us in her ways to go. That is, to go in the way of wisdom, right? This is a prayer for wisdom to come into the world. And it says, not just change my life. You notice that? It's a prayer that wisdom would actually order all things, all social systems, all the ways that we live, to make them into harmony and goodness. Show us the way of knowledge so that we can live that way. Then take a look at the third verse. O come, thou desire of nations. That's a verse, that's a reference from the Old Testament prophets. O come, desire of nations. Bind all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy, strife, and quarrel cease. Fill the whole world with heaven's peace. Nice, huh? The desire of nations was the Messiah that the Old Testament people looked forward to, who would come and bring order and peace to the world. It says, bind everybody's hearts together. Fill the whole world with peace. So the first thing that we notice, and this is going to be a repeating theme in many of these Christmas songs that we call Christmas carols, the repeating theme is that the birth of Jesus was supposed to be something for the world, for the whole world. It had a global influence. And I emphasize that because often when we discuss religion, when we preach about Christ, when we try to promote Christianity, when we talk about it in church even ourselves, we often focus only on the effect of the Christian message on us individually. Am I right? And that's a great thing. Jesus has the power to come into people's lives and transform them. Give them hope where there was sorrow. Give them a sense of meaning where all there was, emptiness and sorrow. So this is great. I would imagine that everybody sitting in this room today is here because we've had a personal experience with Jesus. Or we're looking for one, right? We're looking for that sense of meaning and fulfillment. But if you pay attention to these songs that we sing at Christmas time, they actually go way beyond the personal. They're talking about something big, that the whole world would be put right and put back in order. This is an interesting point, but I'm going to tell you, as we get into it, this idea raises a big challenge for us. And you'll see what I mean as we go. Take a look at hymn number 119. This is also a well-known, common hymn that we sing at this time of year. Angels from the realms of glory. Pay attention to what the words say. Angels from the realms of glory, wing your flight over all the earth. You who sang creation's story, now proclaim the Messiah's birth. And then there's the chorus, come and worship, come and worship. Worship Christ, the newborn King. Well, look at what's in that very first verse. It's saying, the angels who sang when God created the world have a new reason to sing because the Messiah is born. And then it says, we have a newborn King. Do you get the import of that? You have to know the Old Testament history and background to understand why that's important and why the angels should sing. Again, the Jewish people had a hope for a leader to come called the Messiah, right? The Messiah, by the way, is the Hebrew word for the one who's anointed. So when in the Old Testament days they would anoint a king or a priest with oil, that was the word Messiah, right? I'm not sure what form of the verb it was, but that's where we get the concept. A Messiah is the one who's anointed. The word Christ in Greek is the same word, but instead of Hebrew, it's Greek. So they're saying we're looking for that one who's going to be designated the leader and the king of the world. That's going to put all things right. It's embedded right here in these Christmas songs, what we call. Take a look at verse 3. Sages, in other words, wise people who are studying. He says, sages, leave your contemplation, because brighter visions beam afar. Seek the great desire of nations. There's that term again, right? You have seen his natal star. In other words, you've seen the birth of the Messiah. You've seen the star that signals something greater than just what we can get out of books. As fun as that is, right? The Messiah has come. It's the same theme again as we saw in the first hymn. There's a Messiah to come who's going to order everything near and far and put it right. And then in the next two, Numbers 120, 121, these are lighter, these are fun songs. You can almost say these are children's songs, but they carry the same idea. There's a song in the air. There's a star in the sky. There's a mother's deep prayer and a baby's low cry. This is talking about the birth of Jesus, right? And the star rains its fire while the beautiful sing. For the manger of Bethlehem cradles a king. It doesn't just say the manger has delivered to us a baby who's going to be a great teacher, although Jesus was. It doesn't even say the manger cradles a baby who's going to die for our sins so that we can be forgiven, right? It says there's a new king. There's a new king in town, right? It's amazing. And then go tell it on the mountain, the same thing. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus the Christ is born. It is again that theme of the Messiah. That's what almost all of the songs that we sing at this time of year have to say. But like I said, there's a problem embedded in there. We're going to get to that in a minute. Take a look at number 122. Hark, the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. And then the next line, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all you nations, right? Not just Israel, not just us individually. Join the triumph of the skies. With the angelic hosts proclaim Christ is born in Bethlehem. There it is again, that idea that the Christ has come. The Christ is born in Bethlehem to bring a news to all the nations of peace on earth. How about number 125? This is the classic. We sang it earlier. It makes some bold declarations. Joy to the world. Look at the second verse. Joy to the earth. The Savior reigns. Let men their songs employ, while fields and floods, rocks, hills, and plains repeat the sounding joy. Wow. So human beings are supposed to sing. Nature is supposed to sing. Because something has happened, right? He rules the earth, it says. And then in the last verse, verse 4, He rules the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of His righteousness and the wonders of His love. This is all great central theme throughout the entire Bible, from the Old Testament through the New, that a person was to come, known as the Messiah in Hebrew, known as the Christ in Greek, who would be a leader of Israel, a new king who would govern the world with truth and grace and righteousness and peace. Am I right? This is a bigger story than just our own personal salvation, as beautiful and important as that is to us, right? This is a promise of a world made new under the reign of God's principles through His Messiah, Jesus Christ. But I said there's a problem with this. Do you see what the problem with this was? Now I'll tell you something. I want to back out. I was planning in my mind to give an upbeat, beautiful, happy presentation today. But by following my own plan, that is, by actually looking at the lines in the story, I had to see a problem here. There's something wrong with this picture. And it's a question that came up to me throughout the week, so I had to confront it myself. Now there's another hymn that deals with this story, and I think you probably heard it. It's not in the hymnal, however. It was written by a well-known American poet by the name of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He lived in Massachusetts in the middle of the 1800s. And apparently he had a son who was kind of a wild kid, you know, kind of a renegade son. And he was a great marksman. He could shoot rifles. But somehow he even shot his own pinky finger off on one occasion. And when the Civil War broke out, he was so dedicated to the cause of abolition that he actually ran away from home as a teenager, late teenager, went to Washington so he could sign up to fight in the war. And it turns out that he was really good at it. He went up the ranks, he became a lieutenant, then he got shot. He wasn't killed, but he got shot and he had to go home. But in any case, when Henry Wadsworth lived, all of this was going on in the country, the Civil War. And he wrote a hymn that we know called, I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. Are you familiar with this one? It goes like this. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and mild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. I thought how, as the day had come, the belfries, people don't know what that means, it's the towers with the bells in them, right? The belfries of all Christendom had called along, I can't see it, along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. He says, we're at Christmas time. The bells are playing these Christmas carols. Peace on earth, peace on earth. But later he says, he talks about the cannons that fire. And he says, and in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. So I'm looking at these Christmas songs, I'm telling you, and all that they promise and all that they say of a Messiah who came 2,000 years ago to bring peace on earth, who came to rule the world with truth and grace. But there's a problem. We don't see it. We don't see peace on earth. What happened? There's still so much suffering. People in power and groups of people together do things that rip the hearts out of people, that tear their bodies to pieces and destroy souls. Now, here's the thing. As believers, we don't really let this situation trouble us that much because we have confidence in God, right? We have faith in God. We know what we know, and the things like we were talking about in Job, there are some questions we can't answer, right? We were just discussing that. And so we sort of have a way of putting them on the back burner because we know who we have believed in. We know our experience with God. We know the promise. We know the sense of the presence of the Holy Spirit. And so we're willing to put those things off to the side, even though we can't explain it. But what if you were not a believer yet, right? Or what if you're a believer and you're coming to grips with the fact that, hey, there are some unanswered questions about this story. What do you do? Now, there are some common answers, and I know some, and I'll tell you them. One is the idea that God is sovereign. Sovereign means in complete control. God is in control. We don't have the answers, but we assume there's some reason for it. Am I right? Maybe this is our default mechanism. If there are things we can't explain, we just let go and trust God. And that's good. That's fine. But it doesn't help some people. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't answer all the questions necessarily. It leaves us with unanswered questions. Another one that you hear is that God is taking a long time to wind up the history of earth because he wants more people to be saved, right? But that's a long time of suffering when you think about it. A lot of pain that people have gone through for decades, centuries, and millennia. And then along with that, there's a verse that comes out of the New Testament that says, well, with God, 1,000 years, you know how to finish the story, right? 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. Well, that's all very good if you're God, right? You know, 1,000 years is like a day if you're God, but if you're not God, that's 1,000 years of joy and sorrow, and sometimes, and maybe often, misery. So, it's good if you're a believer. I'm not knocking that. I'm not addressing people who have faith now. I'm just dealing with this issue that's embedded in these songs. Christ came 2,000 years ago to make his blessings flow, as it says, as far as the curse is found. But we don't see it. It's not there yet. What do you do with that? What do you do with it? I had to wrestle with it and go beyond some of the simple answers. And I have a couple of proposals. When I think about the Christmas story and the message of the gospel, I have to bring it into the real world that we're just talking about, right? Not the ideal world, not the inner world, but the actual world. What does this old story really tell us? And how can we put it into practice? First of all, the story of the Bible as a whole, the Old Testament looking forward to Christ, the New Testament reporting on his coming and his death, his resurrection, and his ascension, they communicate to us the fact that God does indeed have a goal for the earth. I don't know what other philosophies there are. I've heard that there are other philosophies that make the world like a cycle, that things happen over and over again, that there's a creation, and then there's development and collapse, and then it all repeats. That's a cyclical version. Then I've heard of a version of history that nothing really is determined. Whatever happens, happens. But in the biblical view, there's actually purpose and end goal. There's a meaning. And that God created the world with an intention, and he has the end goal of restoring and establishing a just, peaceful, and healthy world. That's why we sing about that. That's what the message of the Bible is from front to back. That there's a vision of a world in which the blessings do flow to everyone, where everyone has a chance. There's a vision of a world that will be ruled by God's righteousness. And it's a global vision. It's an important vision. So that's the first thing I thought. When I think about the real world as it is, as messed up as it is, and as beautiful as it is, combined, I remember that there is an ideal, there is a vision, and it's embedded in the story of Christmas, right? This hope for a Messiah, this hope for a renewal. But there's more that's to this story. There's also a method indicated in the story of Christ, in the story of Jesus' birth. God indicates a way of establishing righteousness. And I wrote down, we could go back to hymn number 122, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. There's a meaning embedded in that hymn and elsewhere. Number 122, we're going to read the second and third verses now. Here's what it says. Christ, by highest heaven adored. Christ, the everlasting Lord, in the manger born a king, while adoring angels sing. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Bid the trembling soul be still. Peace on earth to men goodwill. Bid the trembling soul be still. Christ on earth has come to dwell. Jesus, our Emmanuel. You get the theme there, and that it's a big statement of theology right there in that one verse. You know what this verse talks about? It talks about a pre-existent person of the Godhead, Christ, who was once exalted in heaven, who came down, became a human being to be with us. Fundamental, foundational teaching of the Christian church, am I right? Yes. And at Christmas time, we remember how God goes about his business. Not by force, but by coming down. Verse 3, Hail, the heaven-born Prince of Peace. Hail, the Son of Righteousness. Life and light to all he brings. Risen with healing in his wings. Mild, he lays his glory by. Born that man no more may die. Born to raise the sons of earth. Born to give them second birth. So there's a method that God uses. God has a vision and a goal of a just, beautiful world, organized according to love and service and peace and righteousness. But how's he going to get there? Not by force, not by power, not by coercion. Those are shortcuts to God. The way he does it is by giving the example of love and trying to get it into our hearts. That's the message that I take away. The world is a mess, but the Christmas message is still real. That God is the kind of God that comes down. You know, there's another hymn that we all know and that we all love, but I don't think we always sing the third verse. Again, it's not in the hymnal. Oh, Holy Night. You know that one? It's relatively modern. Oh, Holy Night, the stars are brightly shining. I love the third verse. It goes like this. Led by a light of faith, serenely beaming, with glowing hearts, at thy cradle we stand. It's talking about us. We come to God at this time of year with glowing hearts to his cradle. And then it talks about the wise men, and it says, led by the light of faith. I forget what the other term is. Here come the wise men from the Orient land. And then it says, the King of Kings lay thus in lowly manger. The King of Kings lay thus in lowly manger. In all our trials, born to be our friend. He knows our needs. To our weakness no stranger. And then it says, the way we sing it, the words are not right. It says, behold your King, before him lowly bend. Have you ever seen that? But actually that's not the original. It says, behold your King, before the lowly bend. In other words, the King of heaven bows in service to the lowly. That's a different way of doing it. And this is all embedded in the Christmas message. The world is still messed up. The rule of God hasn't taken hold yet. But there's a message and there's a hope. Because there's a goal and there's a method. The method is love. And that takes time. That's just the reality. And I thought about something else. When individuals, I'm coming back to individuals again. When individuals hear this message, it works. The world's problems are not solved. But when individuals hear the news of Jesus Christ, of God in Christ, it changes them. It has an effect. Am I right?
Yes.
That's why we're here. It does something. Regardless of some of the questions that we can't answer, we know that it works. It changes individuals. I have down here written hymn number 135, O Little Town of Bethlehem. 135. There's a little element of this in the hymn. The third verse. It says, how silently the wondrous gift is given. In other words, when Jesus was born, you didn't hear noise. It was just a quiet conception and a birth, right? But then it says, so God, in other words, in this way, God imparts to human hearts the blessings of his heaven. No ear may hear his coming, but in this world of sin, where meek souls will receive him still, the dear Christ enters in. So it's there. The individual transformation element is there.
Right.
But it's part of this big picture. So if I put all of these three things together, God has a vision. God has a method. And the message works for individual people. it makes me think that God's project in the world was not just something that happened in an instant. It's a process. And it's a real process. It's a process as real as the world is real. As real as the world is, with all of its problems and all of the characters in it. That means what? About 7 billion of us? Now is it? Something like that? And all of the crazy and wonderful things that we do. As real as all of that is, God has to work with that reality. I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think when we read about faith and we read the Bible, we think it's so supernatural. We think it's so supernatural that it's almost magical, right? That God just waved the magic wand 2,000 years ago and it was all supposed to be fixed. Well, clearly that's not the case. So we have to find a way to mesh the theory with the reality. And the way I'm coming to see it is this. It's even hard for God to get it done. You know what I mean? Because it's a process. And the reason it's hard is because He has to change us. He has to change us. And the only way He can do it is by soft means, soft force, by love, not by a magic wand. God has to work in history. And listen, here's the thing. As I contemplated that this week, long and hard, Jesus started a real historical process. See, let me back up again. The way we think about religion, and you've heard me say this for the 2 years that I've been your pastor, the way we think about religion, it's always about just individuals and their own conversion, right? That's kind of like an abstract thing. That happens unseen. But there's that other dimension that I'm talking about today that's also a part of the biblical message. And that's the transformation of the world. That's a little bit harder, you know? That's taken a long time. That's what this is all about. As a matter of fact, as I was thinking about this, I thought of a well-known quote by Martin Luther King Jr. He said, the arc, you know what the arc is, right? Curvature. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. In other words, the work is long and the work is hard, but it's getting there. We have to assert that faith. We have to affirm the Christmas faith that Jesus and His message came to affect the real world, and it's a long-term process. It's not a fiction. It's not a supernatural world that exists only in our imaginations. This is what I'm saying. This is what I had to come to this week when I was reading all of these beautiful promises about a world ruled by peace. And there is no peace. It's not a fictional world. God has to deal with the real world. When we think about religion, it can't be just about what happens to us and the promise of forgiveness. That's as beautiful and important as it is. There's a bigger picture and a wider application, and it's taking time. That's the meaning that we often overlook. How do we deal with it? You know, think about some of the famous Christmas stories, right? I'm not talking about in the Bible, but the famous ones. A Christmas Carol, right? Everybody knows the story of Ebenezer Scrooge. You guys know in Scandinavia, the story by Charles Dickens about the miser who doesn't want to help anybody, and he gets visited on Christmas Eve by 3 spirits. Remember? Spirit of Christmas past, spirit of Christmas present, spirit of Christmas future. And something happens. The next day he's generous. That's what the message is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to have effect where? Just inside of our hearts?
In our heads.
In our heads, in our hearts, and also in the real world. Then there are 2 others, much shorter. One's called the Matchstick Carol. You guys know that one? Hans Christian Andersen. It's about a very, very poor woman who, a small girl, who lived with a mom who actually, I think, if I remember the story correctly, passed away from freezing to death. She went out into the world because they sold matches. That's how they made money, by selling matches. And it's a cold, cold night, and she's up against a brick wall. And she lights a match to warm herself. And she is able to see through the wall at people celebrating Christmas with the Christmas trees and the candles and the food and the gifts. And she likes it so much, she strikes all the matches. But she didn't really see through the wall. She froze to death. And it was in that dying vision that she saw it. And there's another one by Dostoevsky called The Heavenly Christmas Tree. And it's the same theme. It's a poor boy. He's running away from the cold. And he dreams that he sees the heavenly Christmas tree come down. But in the morning, he's dead under the tree. You know what these stories are trying to get us to do, right? It's trying to get us to take the concept, to take the theory, to take the spirit, and actually do something about it. That's what I'm talking about. So I didn't plan to give a sermon like this today, you know? This is a heavy sermon. I wanted to give something happy and bright for Christmas. But I had to come to grips with the message itself. The idea that Jesus came to rule, but we don't see it yet. There's a theological expression for this. Frank knows it. We call it the already and the not yet. There's something about Christian that Jesus has already done. Jesus has established the pattern. Jesus has brought the heavenly DNA into the world. He's shown us the way. He's defeated evil. He's risen to power in the heavens. That's the already. But the not yet is, it hasn't permeated the earth yet. That's why Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Then what did he say? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's still happening. That hasn't happened yet. So let me wrap up. I work at a university, as you know, and I've been doing proverbs from around the world. And I found an interesting one from China. It goes like this. Deep doubts, deep wisdom. Small doubts, small wisdom. And a friend of mine, I posted that online. He said, why don't we say, instead of doubts, why don't we say big questions? Deep questions, deep wisdom. I said, all right, I'll go with that. I had to ask some hard questions this week. How come? If we sing about His rule, going as far as the curse is found to bring blessings, that the message was peace on earth, how come we don't see it? That's a hard question. Would you agree? I hope we came to some big answers. It's because it's a real process. We tend to think of religion only as an interior kind of thing that only affects us individually. But to make it happen in the real world, that's a process. It's a crucial issue. So we know God has a vision of righteousness. He sent the Messiah to show us the way. He has a method. The way is love, inner transformation that's supposed to work then in the real world. And those who accept it, they experience it, right? So we know the truth about God. We know the truth about ourselves, that we are beloved. We are transformed. And on this time of year, we can enjoy the goodness of the birth of Christ, the good news of the gospel, because we have faith. What do you say? Amen. And now we can celebrate His birth, remembering who we are. Who are we? We are friends and followers of a dying Messiah, a King of love and righteousness. And we've been called to spread the message and the experience of love and justice and hope in the world. In the name of Jesus Christ. Now, before we have the closing song, I'm very happy to say that my wife and her brother and sister-in-law and daughter are going to treat us with a song before we close. Thank you.
Our song is entitled Jesus, Savior, Friend.